Topic 4.3 Politics and Regional Interests. But this momentous question, the Missouri Compromise, like a fireball in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I consider it the knell of the Union. Thomas Jefferson, April 1820. Learning objective. Explain how different regional interests affected debates about the role of federal government in the early republic. The election of James Monroe as president in 1816, less than 2 years after the last battle of the war in 1812, inaugurated what one newspaper editorial characterized as an era of good feelings. The term gained wide currency and was later adopted by historians to describe Monroe's 2 terms in office. A closer examination of this period shows a more complicated picture. The era of good feelings. The period's nickname suggests the Monroe years were marked by a spirit of nationalism, optimism, and goodwill. In some ways, they were. One party, the Federalists, faded into oblivion, and Monroe's party, the Democratic Republicans, adopted some of their policies and dominated politics. This perception of unity and harmony, however, can be misleading and oversimplified. Throughout the era, people had heated debates over tariffs, the national bank, internal improvements, and public land sales. Sectionalist tension over slavery were increasing. Moreover, even a sense of party unity was illusory, since antagonistic factions among Democratic Republicans would soon split into 2. The actual period of good feelings may have lasted only from the election of 1816 to the Panic of 1819. James Monroe. As a young man, James Monroe had fought in the Revolutionary War and suffered through the Valley Forge winter. He had become prominent in Virginia politics and had served as Jefferson's minister to Great Britain and as Madison's Secretary of the State. He continued the Virginia dynasty. Of the first 5 presidents, 4 were from Virginia. The other, John Adams, was from Massachusetts. In the election of 1816, Monroe defeated the Federalist Rufus King overwhelmingly, 183 electoral votes to 34. By 1820, the Federalist Party had practically vanished, and Monroe received every electoral vote except 1. With no organized political opposition, Monroe represented the growing nationalism of the American people. Under Monroe, the country acquired Florida, agreed on the Missouri Compromise, and adopted the Monroe Doctrine. Economic nationalism. One outgrowth of the War of 1812 was a political movement to support the growth of the nation's economy. Subsidizing internal improvement, the building of roads and canals, was one aspect of the movement. Protecting budding U.S. industries from European competition was a second aspect. Often opinions on these economic issues were based on what appeared best for one's section or region. Tariff of 1816. Before the War of 1812, Congress had levied low tariffs on imports as a method for raising government revenue. Then, during the war, manufacturers erected many factories to support goods that previously had been imported from Britain. Now, in peacetime, these American manufacturers feared that British goods would be dumped on American markets and take away much of their business. Congress raised tariffs for the express purpose of protecting U.S. manufacturers from competition rather than to simply raise revenue. This was the first protective tariff in U.S. history, the first of many to come. New England, which had little manufacturing at the time, was the only section to oppose the higher tariffs. Even the South and West, which had opposed tariffs in the past and would oppose them in the future, generally supported the 1816 tariff, believing that it was needed for national prosperity. Henry Clay's American System. Henry Clay of Kentucky, a leader in the House of Representatives, proposed a comprehensive method for advancing the nation's economic growth. His plan, which he called the American System, consisted of three parts: 1. Protective tariffs, 2. A national bank, and 3. Internal improvement. Clay argued that protective tariffs would promote American manufacturing and also raise revenue with which to build a national transportation system of federally constructed roads and canals. A national bank would keep the system running smoothly by providing a national currency. The tariffs would chiefly benefit the East, internal improvements would promote growth in the West and the South, and the bank would aid the economies of all sections. Two parts of Clay's system were already in place in 1816, the last year of James Madison's presidency. Congress in that year adopted a protective tariff and also chartered the Second Bank of the United States. The charter of the first bank, Hamilton's brainchild, had been allowed to expire in 1811. On the matter of internal improvements, however, both Madison and Monroe objected that the Constitution did not explicitly provide for the spending of federal money on roads and canals. Throughout his presidency, Monroe consistently vetoed acts of Congress providing funds for road building and canal building projects. Thus, the individual states were left to make internal improvements on their own. The Panic of 1819. The first major financial panic since the Constitution had been ratified shook the nation in 1819. The economic disaster occurred after the Second Bank of the United States tightened credit in an effort to control inflation. Many state banks closed, and unemployment, bankruptcies, and imprisonment for debt increased sharply. The Depression hit the West hardest, where many people were in debt because they had speculated on land during the Euphoria after the War of 1812. In 1819, the Bank of the United States foreclosed on large amounts of Western farmland. As a result of the bank panic and depression, nationalistic beliefs were shaken. In the West, the economic crisis changed many voters' political outlook. Westerners began calling for land reform and expressing strong opposition to both the national bank and the debtors' prisons. Political changes. The Federalist Party declined rapidly because it failed to adapt as the nation grew. After opposing the War of 1812, see Topic 4.4, and leading a secessionist convention at Harvard, the party seemed out of step with the nationalistic temper of the times. As its crushing defeat in the election of 1816, it ceased to be a national party and failed to nominate a presidential candidate in 1820. Changes in the Democratic-Republican Party. Meanwhile, the Democratic-Republican Party, the only remaining national party, faced serious internal strain as it adjusted to changing times. Members such as John Randolph clung to the old party ideals of limited government and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Most members, however, adopted what had once been Federalist ideas, such as maintaining a large army and navy and supporting a national bank. Some members reversed their views from one decade to the next. For example, Daniel Webster of Massachusetts strongly opposed both the tariffs of 1816 and 1824, but then supported even higher tariff rates in 1828. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina was another Democratic-Republican leader who reversed positions. An outspoken war hawk and nationalist in 1812, Calhoun championed states' rights after 1828. Political factions and sectional differences became more intense during Monroe's second term, when Monroe, honoring the two-term tradition, declined to be a candidate again. 4 other Democratic Republicans sought election as president in 1824. How this election split the party and led to the emergence of 2 rival parties is explained in Topic 4.8. Western Settlement and the Missouri Compromise. In the 10 years after the start of the war of 1812, The population of settlers west of the Appalachian Mountains had doubled. Most went to the region between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River. Some, though, were beginning to settle in the Louisiana Territory purchased in 1803. Much of the nationalistic and economic interest in the country was centered on the West, which presented both opportunities and new questions. Reason for westward movement. Several factors combined to stimulate rapid growth along the western frontier during the presidencies of Madison and Monroe. Acquisition of lands. Military victories under General William Henry Harrison in the Indiana Territory and Andrew Jackson in Florida and the South over American Indians opened vast new territories for white settlers. Economic pressures. The economic difficulties in the Northeast from the embargo and the war caused people from this region to seek a new future across the Appalachians. In the South, tobacco planters needed new land to replace the soil exhausted by years of poor farming methods. They found good land for planting cotton in Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Improved transportation. Pioneers had an easier time reaching the frontier as a result of the building of roads and canals, steamboats, and railroads. Immigrants. More Europeans were being attracted to America by speculators offering cheap land in the Great Lakes region and in valleys of the Ohio, Cumberland, and Mississippi rivers. New questions and issues. Despite their rapid growth, the new states of the West were small relative to those of the other two sections. To enhance their limited political influence in the Congress, Western representatives bargained with politicians from other sections. The primary concern of the Western states were as follows. 1. Cheap money, easy credit from state banks rather than from the Bank of the United States. 2. Low prices for land sold by the federal government. And 3. Improved transportation. However, on the critical issue of slavery, Westerners disagreed over permitting it. Those settling territory to the South wanted slavery for economic reasons, labor for the cotton fields, while those settling to the North had no use for slavery. In 1819, when the Missouri Territory applied to the Congress for statehood, the slavery issue became a subject of angry debate. The Missouri Compromise. Ever since 1791 to 1792, when Vermont entered the Union as a free state and Kentucky entered as a slave state, politicians in Congress had attempted to preserve a sectional balance between the North and the South. Keeping a balance in the House of Representatives was difficult because the population in the North was growing more rapidly than in the South. By 1818, the northern states held a majority of 105 to 81 in the House. However, in the Senate, the votes remained divided evenly, 11 slave states and 11 free states. As long as this balance was preserved, Southern senators could block legislation that they believed threatened the interests of their section. Missouri's bid for statehood alarmed the North because slavery was well established there. If Missouri came in as a slave state, it would tip the political balance in the South's favor. Furthermore, Missouri was the first part of the Louisiana Purchase to apply for statehood. Southerners and Northerners alike worried about the future status of the other new territories applying for statehood from the rest of the vast Louisiana Purchase. Tallmadge Amendment. Representative James Tallmadge from New York ignited the debate about the Missouri question by proposing an amendment to the bill for Missouri's admission. The amendment called for 1. Prohibiting the further introduction of slaves into Missouri, and 2. Requiring the children of Missouri slaves to be emancipated at the age of 25. If adopted, the Tallmadge Amendment would have led to gradual elimination of slavery in Missouri. The amendment was defeated in the Senate as enraged Southerners saw it as the first step in a Northern effort to abolish slavery in all states. Clay's proposals. After months of heated debates in Congress and throughout the nation, Henry Clay won majority support for 3 bills that, taken together, represented a compromise. 1. Admit Missouri as a slaveholding state. 2. Admit Maine as a free state. 3. Prohibit slavery in the rest of Louisiana Territory north of latitude 36 degrees 30 minutes. Both houses passed the bills, and President Monroe added his signature in March 1820 to what became known as the Missouri Compromise. Aftermath. Sectional feelings on the slavery issue subsided after 1820. The Missouri Compromise preserved sectional balance for more than 30 years and provided time for the nation to mature. Nevertheless, if an era of good feelings existed, it was badly damaged by the storm of sectional controversy over Missouri. After this political crisis, Americans were torn between feelings of nationalism, loyalty to the Union, on the one hand, and feelings of sectionalism, loyalty to one's own region, on the other. Key terms by theme. Public confidence. Era of good feelings. James Monroe. Economic nationalism. Sectionalism. Industry. Tariff of 1816. Protective tariff. Henry Clay. American system. Second Bank of the United States. Panic of 1819. Making the law. Tallmadge Amendment. Missouri Compromise, 1820.